Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. A raging inferno devoured Chicago in October 1871, turning the bustling city into a smoldering ruin. The flames, relentless and unforgiving, consumed homes, businesses, and landmarks, leaving thousands homeless and reshaping the city forever. It all started on the night of October 8th in a small wooden barn on DeKoven Street. Within hours, the fire spread uncontrollably, fueled by strong winds, wooden buildings, and an unusually dry season. By the time the flames were finally extinguished on October 10th, nearly 4 square miles of the city had been reduced to ash, and around 300 people had lost their lives. The Great Chicago Fire was more than just a tragedy. It became a turning point in urban history. Before the fire, Chicago was a rapidly growing city, but its infrastructure was fragile. The streets were lined with wooden structures, and fire safety measures were practically non-existent. The devastation exposed the city's vulnerabilities, but also set the stage for one of the most ambitious urban rebuilding efforts in American history. Out of the ashes, Chicago emerged stronger, transforming into a model of modern city planning and architecture. This disaster forced urban developers and city planners to rethink how cities were built. The reconstruction efforts led to the implementation of stricter fire codes, better building materials, and the rise of steel-framed skyscrapers. Architects like Daniel Burnham and Louis Sullivan helped shape a new Chicago skyline, pioneering designs that would influence cities across the world. Innovations such as fire-resistant building materials, wider streets, and improved water supply systems became standard in urban planning. The fire also changed the way cities prepared for and responded to disasters. It highlighted the importance of organized fire departments and led to improvements in firefighting technology. Fire-resistant brick and stone structures replaced the flimsy wooden buildings that had fueled the blaze. The city's economy, though initially crippled, rebounded with remarkable speed as investors saw an opportunity in rebuilding. Within just a few decades, Chicago became one of the most advanced and architecturally significant cities in the world. The Great Chicago Fire was not just a catastrophe, it was a catalyst for change. It reshaped the city, revolutionized urban planning, and left a lasting legacy that continues to influence modern cities today. What was once a story of destruction became one of resilience and reinvention, proving that even in the face of devastation, a city, and its people, can rise from the ashes stronger than ever. Chicago in the years leading up to 1871 was a city, experiencing unparalleled growth and transformation. Strategically located along the Great Lakes, it became a key center for commerce, manufacturing, and transportation. The city's population had surged to nearly 300,000, driven by waves of immigrants and workers seeking economic opportunities in industries such as meatpacking, lumber, railroads, and grain trading. However, beneath this rapid expansion lay an overlooked but deadly weakness. Chicago was a city made almost entirely of wood, making it a tinderbox waiting for a spark. The role of wood in Chicago's growth and vulnerability. During the mid-19th century, wood was the preferred building material in Chicago for several reasons. First, the city was surrounded by vast forests in the Midwest, ensuring an abundant and cheap supply of lumber. Second, wood was easy to work with, allowing structures to be built quickly to keep pace with the booming population. Third, Chicago's ideal climate with cold winters and humid summers made wood an appealing choice for insulation and flexibility. However, the over-reliance on wood came with significant risks. Nearly every structure, homes, businesses, warehouses, and even sidewalks, was constructed from lumber. Many buildings were hastily erected with little regard for fire safety, leaving gaps, poor ventilation, and improperly maintained chimneys. That became fire hazards. Adding to the problem, rooftops were often covered with tar, a highly flammable substance that could quickly ignite and spread flames across entire city blocks. Even the streets contributed to the city's fire risk. Chicago's roadways were primarily made of wooden planks, which provided a smooth surface for carriages, but also acted as fuel in the event of a fire. Sidewalks, too, were wooden, and with businesses and homes packed closely together, any fire that started could spread uncontrollably in minutes. A summer of drought. The perfect storm. While Chicago's structural vulnerability was always present, the conditions leading up to the Great Fire of 1871 made the situation far more perilous. The summer of that year was one of the driest on record. Rainfall had been minimal for months, leaving buildings, streets, and open spaces dry and highly combustible. The city's fire department, though staffed with skilled firefighters, was stretched thin due to frequent small fires breaking out throughout the city. Moreover, firefighting technology at the time was not advanced. Water pressure was often weak, and fire hydrants were not widespread. Firefighting equipment relied on horse-drawn pump wagons, which were slow to respond to emergencies. Given the city's wooden infrastructure and the extreme dryness of the season, Chicago was essentially sitting on a time bomb. In summary, Chicago's explosive growth and economic success masked a severe and overlooked danger. The heavy reliance on wood for nearly every aspect of construction, combined with a summer of drought and limited fire control measures, made the city an inevitable victim of disaster. The events that followed on the night of October 8, 1871, would forever change Chicago and serve as a grim lesson in urban planning and fire safety. The night of the fire, October 8, 1871 A's. Evening fell on October 8, 1871. Chicago was already primed for disaster. Strong winds swept through the city, fanning the embers of previous small fires that had broken out earlier that week. Around 9 p.m., a fire started in a barn behind the home of Patrick and Catherine O'Leary on DeKoven Street, located in the city's southwestern section. What followed was one of the most devastating urban fires in American history, leveling much of Chicago within 2 days. The mystery of the fire's origin, despite its catastrophic impact, the exact cause of the fire, remains one of the most debated topics in Chicago's history. The most enduring legend is that Mrs. O'Leary's cow kicked over a lantern during milking, igniting the hay and starting the inferno. This story became so widely accepted that it was printed in newspapers, repeated in history books, and ingrained in folklore. However, there is little actual evidence to support this claim. The legend of the O'Leary cow, a convenient scapegoat? The story of the cow knocking over a lantern first appeared in an article published by the Chicago Republican newspaper on October 9, 1871, just a day after the fire began. However, the reporter who wrote it, Michael Ahern, admitted years later that he had fabricated the story to create a more dramatic and engaging narrative. Catherine O'Leary always denied any involvement in starting the fire. She insisted that she had gone to bed early and was asleep when the fire broke out. Her testimony was supported by others who lived in the neighborhood, including a man named Daniel Pegleg Sullivan, who first spotted the flames and raised the alarm. Sullivan claimed that he saw the fire while walking past the O'Leary barn and immediately ran to alert the family and neighbors. Despite the lack of evidence, the O'Learys, especially Catherine, were vilified in the public eye. As poor Irish immigrants, they made easy scapegoats in a city where anti-Irish sentiment was common. Many believed the stereotype of the drunken, careless Irish laborer, and blaming an Irish woman for one of the worst disasters in American history fit a convenient narrative for the media and political leaders. Other theories. What really started the fire? Because the cow and lantern story lacks factual support, historians have explored alternative explanations for the fire's true origin. A different human cause. Some historians believe the fire was caused by an unknown person in or near the barn. Several people were reportedly gambling in the area that night, and one theory suggests that a careless smoker may have knocked over a lantern or dropped a lit cigar, igniting the dry hay. Spontaneous combustion. Some have speculated that spontaneous combustion of hay in the barn might have been the cause. Under certain conditions, damp hay can generate heat as it decomposes, potentially igniting a fire. However, this explanation is less likely because hay needs specific moisture and temperature conditions to self-ignite, and there's no strong evidence that the O'Leary's barn met those conditions. A falling meteor. One of the more unusual theories is that the fire was started by a meteor shower. On the same night as the Great Chicago Fire, major fires also broke out in Peshtigo, Wisconsin, and other parts of the Midwest. Some researchers have suggested that fragments from the comet Biela could have fallen to Earth, sparking multiple fires. While intriguing, this theory lacks definitive scientific proof. Conclusion. A mystery that endures. The Great Chicago Fire's true cause may never be known with absolute certainty. While the legend of Mrs. O'Leary's cow remains the most famous version of events, it is almost certainly a fabrication. The real cause was likely human carelessness, whether it was an overturned lantern, a dropped cigar, or another accidental spark. Regardless of how it started, the fire's rapid spread was due to Chicago's extreme vulnerability. A city made almost entirely of wood, dry conditions after months of drought, and strong winds that turned a small fire into a raging inferno. The blame placed on Catherine O'Leary was unfair, but her story has become an enduring piece of Chicago folklore, forever linked to the fire that reshaped the city. Over the years, alternative theories have emerged. Some believe the fire was started by careless men gambling in the barn, knocking over a lamp in their drunken revelry. Others suspect arson, pointing to reports of several other fires in the city that same night. There's even speculation that spontaneous combustion of hay, a known phenomenon under the right conditions, may have been responsible. Regardless of its true cause, the fire took hold with terrifying speed. The wooden buildings, bone dry from months without rain, became kindling. The wind carried flaming debris from rooftop to rooftop, creating a chain reaction that firefighters were helpless to stop. In mere hours, the fire grew from a small barn blaze to a catastrophic inferno, setting the stage for one of the most devastating urban disasters in American history. As the first flames ignited in the O'Leary barn on the night of October 8, 1871, no one could have predicted the sheer scale of destruction that would follow. Within minutes, the fire leapt to nearby sheds, fences, and wooden houses, feeding off the dry timber like a ravenous beast. The winds, gusting at nearly 30 miles per hour, carried burning embers high into the air, where they rained down on rooftops, blocks away. The fire, now an unstoppable force, began its devastating march toward the heart of Chicago. Several factors turned this blaze into a full-blown catastrophe. The most critical was Chicago's construction itself. Nearly everything in the city was made of wood. The streets were paved with wooden planks, and wooden sidewalks lined every block. Even the bridges spanning the Chicago River were made of timber, allowing the fire to spread easily across the water. The extended drought had made everything even more flammable, and by the time the first alarm was sounded, the fire had already grown too large to contain. Adding to the disaster was a lack of readiness. The Chicago Fire Department, though experienced, was woefully under-equipped for a blaze of this magnitude. The city had just battled another major fire the night before, leaving many firefighters exhausted. Their horse-drawn engines were slow-moving, and water pressure from the hydrants was weak due to excessive demand. A crucial mistake in communication also delayed the response. The first alarm sent firefighters to the wrong location, wasting valuable time. By the time they arrived at DeKoven Street, the fire had already spread beyond their control. As the inferno devoured more of the city, panic set in. Families awoke to the deafening roar of flames and the suffocating heat as their homes became death traps. Crowds of people poured into the streets, grabbing whatever belongings they could carry. Some ran toward the river, hoping the water would provide refuge, while others rushed north, trying to stay ahead of the advancing flames. The fire moved with terrifying speed, leaping from block to block, destroying everything in its path. By the early hours of October 9th, entire sections of the city were engulfed. Iconic landmarks crumbled into the flames. The Grand Courthouse, with its towering cupola, was reduced to rubble when its bell tolled one final time before crashing into the inferno. Churches that had stood for decades collapsed in minutes. The city's business district, once a bustling hub of commerce, became a smoldering wasteland. For those caught in the fire's path, survival was uncertain. Many perished in the chaos, trapped in buildings or overcome by smoke. Others fled to Lincoln Park or the shores of Lake Michigan, some even wading into the freezing water to escape the searing heat. The lucky ones made it to safety, but by the morning of October 10th, when rain finally helped extinguish the flames, the devastation was beyond comprehension. Over 17,000 buildings had been destroyed, nearly a third of the city lay in ruins, and an estimated 100,000 people were left homeless. The Great Chicago Fire was more than just a disaster. It was a moment of reckoning for a city unprepared for such destruction. Yet, in the midst of tragedy, a new Chicago would soon begin to rise. The aftermath of the Great Chicago Fire, a city in ruins. By the morning of October 10, 1871, the Great Chicago Fire, one of the most devastating urban disasters in American history, was finally over. However, it was not human intervention that stopped the inferno. After raging for nearly 2 days, the fire was finally extinguished by a stroke of luck. A light rain began to fall. This much-needed rain, combined with weakening winds and the fire naturally running out of fuel in some areas, helped put an end to the destruction. What remained was a city that barely resembled what had existed before. Nearly 4 square miles of Chicago had been consumed by flames, leaving a desolate, smoking wasteland where entire neighborhoods once stood. The streets were filled with displaced residents, now homeless and wandering in shock, searching for shelter, food, and missing loved ones. The scale of the destruction was almost unimaginable, and Chicago's recovery would be one of the most remarkable rebuilding efforts in American history. The scale of devastation. The statistics of the fire's impact highlight the sheer magnitude of the catastrophe. Over 17,000 buildings destroyed. Residential homes, businesses, churches, schools, hotels, and government buildings were reduced to ash. Many of these structures had been made of wood, and even those built with stone or brick had been no match for the extreme heat, which caused some to crack, crumble, or even melt. More than 100,000 people left homeless. Nearly a third of Chicago's population was displaced. Many had fled to the city's outskirts, camping in fields or open spaces, while others sought refuge in churches and public buildings that had survived the blaze. 300-plus deaths, likely more. Official records state that around 300 people died, but historians believe the true number may have been much higher. Many bodies were incinerated beyond recognition, and some victims may have been undocumented workers or recent immigrants whose deaths were never recorded. $200 million in damages. A staggering amount for the time, the estimated losses, equivalent to billions of dollars today, represented a near-total wipeout of Chicago's economic infrastructure. Thousands of businesses were gone, including warehouses, banks, rail yards, and factories, crippling the city's commercial sector. The city's infrastructure was gutted. The Chicago Water Works, which had provided the city with clean drinking water, was destroyed early in the fire, worsening the humanitarian crisis. Roads were rendered impassable by collapsed buildings and debris. Telegraph lines had burned, cutting off communication, and much of the police and fire department's equipment had been lost in the flames. The physical and psychological toll. The fire had burned so intensely that even structures thought to be fireproof had succumbed. Metal buildings and iron bridges warped and twisted under the heat, and stone buildings, typically resistant to fire, crumbled like sand. The streets were littered with piles of rubble, scorched remnants of furniture, melted iron, and the charred remains of carriages and wagons. For the survivors, the trauma was immense. Many had lost everything: their homes, businesses, savings, and loved ones, within a matter of hours. Families who had been prosperous before the fire were now penniless and living in makeshift shelters. Others had fled in terror as the fire chased them through the streets, leaving behind all their possessions. The psychological scars of that night would remain for years as Chicagoans tried to rebuild their lives from nothing. A city's spirit tested but not broken. Despite the overwhelming devastation, Chicago did not collapse. In the days immediately following the fire, relief efforts began pouring in from other cities and states. Donations of food, clothing, and supplies arrived by rail, and makeshift relief stations were set up to provide aid to the homeless. Business leaders and city officials quickly began planning for reconstruction, determined to rebuild Chicago bigger and better than before. The fire had wiped out much of what made Chicago a thriving metropolis, but it had not destroyed its spirit. In the years that followed, the city would rise from the ashes, becoming a symbol of resilience, innovation, and urban rebirth. The Great Fire of 1871 was a catastrophe, but it was also the catalyst for Chicago's transformation into the modern city it is today. Though the destruction was evident, one detail remains shrouded in uncertainty: the death toll. Official records list around 300 confirmed fatalities, but many believe the true number was much higher. The intense heat of the blaze had reduced many victims to nothing but ash, leaving no remains to count. Others were lost in the Chicago River, either drowned or overcome by smoke and flames before they could reach safety. In a city so large and diverse where many immigrants lived in crowded conditions, it's likely that entire families perished without record. For those who survived, the nightmare was far from over. With no homes to return to, thousands found themselves living in makeshift tents, crammed together in relief camps on the outskirts of the ruined city. Food and clean water were scarce, and disease threatened to spread among the displaced. Despite the devastation, Chicagoans showed incredible resilience. Almost immediately, efforts to rebuild began, and aid poured in from around the country and even from abroad. But beyond the statistics and the ruins, the true impact of the fire is best understood through the voices of those who lived through it. Survivors' accounts paint a vivid picture of the chaos, fear, and extraordinary bravery displayed in the face of disaster. Some recalled running for miles through burning streets, dodging collapsing buildings and falling embers. Parents carried children on their backs, desperate to escape the flames, while others had to make split-second decisions about which direction to flee. One woman described how she barely escaped the fire with her infant child, wading into Lake Michigan and holding on to floating debris for hours as the fire raged on shore. Another survivor, a young boy at the time, later wrote about the eerie silence that followed the fire's end. How the city, once filled with the constant hum of industry and life, now stood in utter, haunting quiet, broken only by the distant cries of the displaced. There were also stories of incredible heroism. Firefighters, though overwhelmed and exhausted, fought until the very end, some losing their lives in the battle against the inferno. Ordinary citizens formed human chains to help the elderly and the injured escape, while others worked tirelessly to save irreplaceable documents, artifacts, and even animals from the burning buildings. The Great Chicago Fire left a scar on the city, both physical and emotional. But even in its darkest hour, the resilience of its people shone through. As the smoke cleared and the first steps toward rebuilding began, Chicago was already proving that it would not only survive, but rise stronger than ever. The immediate aftermath: Chicago struggled to recover. After the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, the city was in a state of crisis. With more than 100,000 people, nearly a third of the population, suddenly homeless, Chicago faced an unprecedented humanitarian emergency. Entire families had lost everything overnight, and thousands roamed the streets searching for shelter, food, and water. Many had fled to the outskirts of the city, camping in open fields, while others sought refuge in the remaining churches, train stations, and even along the shore of Lake Michigan. The challenge was enormous. How could the city care for its displaced residents while simultaneously beginning the Herculean task of rebuilding? Despite the destruction, the response was swift and overwhelming, as relief efforts poured in from across the United States and even from around the world. A nation rallies to help as news of the fire spread. Cities across America quickly mobilized to provide aid. New York City, one of Chicago's biggest economic rivals, was among the first to respond. Despite their competitive relationship, New Yorkers organized relief efforts and sent food, clothing, and financial assistance to help the city recover. Cincinnati and St. Louis, major trade partners of Chicago, also provided significant donations, recognizing that the city's economic downfall would impact the entire Midwest. St. Louis, in particular, sent a trainload of provisions to assist the homeless. Other cities, including Boston, Philadelphia, and Pittsburgh, contributed generously, sending money and supplies to ensure that the survivors had the basic necessities. The American public, moved by the scale of the disaster, donated millions of dollars, and churches, businesses, and civic organizations across the country organized relief drives. These efforts helped provide temporary housing, food, and medical care to those affected. Global support, a remarkable outpouring of international aid. Chicago's devastation also resonated internationally. While 19th-century disaster relief was generally a local or national effort, the response to the Great Chicago Fire was extraordinary in its global reach. London and Paris both contributed substantial financial aid. Given Chicago's importance as a commercial hub, European investors saw its destruction as a loss to global trade and wanted to assist in its recovery. Even countries as far away as Australia sent money to help rebuild the city, a testament to Chicago's international reputation as a thriving economic powerhouse. Other foreign governments and private donors stepped in as well, demonstrating solidarity with the people of Chicago and recognizing the city's importance to world commerce. The overwhelming generosity from both domestic and international donors played a crucial role in stabilizing the situation. Relief funds provided food, medical aid, and temporary housing for survivors, helping prevent widespread disease and further loss of life. Managing the crisis, relief and temporary housing. With so many people homeless, Chicago had to act quickly to prevent further suffering. Makeshift relief stations were set up across the city, distributing food, blankets, and medical supplies. The United States Army stepped in to help organize shelter for those displaced, setting up tent cities and temporary housing in parks and public spaces. One of the largest relief efforts was led by the Relief and Aid Society of Chicago, which became the primary organization coordinating the distribution of funds and supplies. They set up soup kitchens, provided building materials for temporary homes, and worked to rehouse the homeless as winter approached. Despite these efforts, conditions were harsh. Thousands were forced to live in crude wooden barracks or tents, exposed to the elements. Diseases such as typhoid and dysentery became a concern due to overcrowding and unsanitary conditions. Yet, thanks to the swift aid response, the city was able to prevent a second disaster in the form of a public health crisis. The first steps toward rebuilding. While relief efforts were ongoing, Chicago also had to begin the daunting process of rebuilding. The destruction had wiped out not only homes, but also businesses, factories, and vital infrastructure. Yet remarkably, the fire did not destroy Chicago's financial district or its stockyards, two key pillars of its economy. This allowed the city to begin recovering faster than many had expected. The relief funds donated by cities and nations helped lay the foundation for Chicago's reconstruction. Within weeks, businesses were reopening in makeshift structures, and construction crews began clearing debris. The city's leaders were determined to rebuild stronger and safer, which ultimately led to new fire codes and improvements in urban planning. A turning point in disaster response. The global and national response to the Great Chicago Fire set a new precedent for disaster relief efforts. At a time when government aid was minimal, private citizens, businesses, and international allies stepped up to support the recovery. It was one of the first times in history that a city received large-scale international aid following a disaster, demonstrating a new level of humanitarian solidarity. Despite the immense devastation, the relief efforts played a crucial role in stabilizing the city, preventing further loss of life, and setting Chicago on a path toward one of the most remarkable urban comebacks in history. Within just a few years, Chicago would not only recover, but emerge as one of the most innovative and architecturally advanced cities in the world. The fire, though a tragedy, ultimately reshaped the city's future for the better. With so many left without shelter, makeshift tent cities sprang up across the outskirts of Chicago. The largest of these was in what is now Grant Park, where rows of Army-style tents housed thousands of displaced families. While conditions were far from ideal, they provided a temporary refuge as Chicagoans worked to rebuild their lives. Churches, charities, and volunteer groups played a crucial role, setting up soup kitchens and distributing essentials to those in need. Despite the devastation, a spirit of resilience and determination took hold, pushing the city forward. The fire also marked a turning point in urban planning and construction. Before the disaster, Chicago had been a city of wooden buildings, hastily constructed in response to rapid population growth. Now, fire-resistant materials became the new standard. Brick and stone replaced wood as the primary building materials, and new laws required wider streets to act as fire breaks, preventing future blazes from spreading so easily. The city also adopted stricter building codes, ensuring that structures were better prepared to withstand potential disasters. Perhaps the most significant change was the birth of the modern skyscraper. With much of the downtown area wiped out, architects and city planners saw an opportunity to rebuild in a way that had never been done before. By the 1880s, steel frame construction techniques allowed for taller, sturdier buildings, setting the stage for Chicago to become the birthplace of the skyscraper. Visionary architects like Daniel Burnham and Louis Sullivan took advantage of this new technology, designing structures that would redefine urban skylines around the world. The fire, in many ways, had forced the city into the future. The lessons learned from the Great Chicago Fire extended beyond architecture. Firefighting itself was revolutionized as cities across the country recognized the importance of better equipment, faster response times, and improved infrastructure. Chicago rebuilt its fire department with more advanced steam-powered fire engines, better trained firefighters, and a new alarm system to prevent miscommunication like the one that had delayed response during the fire. Cities worldwide took note, implementing stricter fire codes and upgrading their own firefighting strategies. Emergency response planning also saw dramatic improvements. The fire had exposed the dangers of unregulated urban growth and poor city planning, prompting urban developers to rethink how cities should be structured to withstand disasters. New sanitation systems, better road layouts, and improved water supply networks became priorities for growing cities. Despite the immense suffering caused by the fire, Chicago's recovery was nothing short of extraordinary. Within weeks, businesses reopened in temporary locations, and within months, reconstruction was well underway. The city's economy rebounded at an astonishing pace, attracting new investments that helped fuel its transformation into a global powerhouse. The fire had not destroyed Chicago's spirit. It had ignited its reinvention. By the late 19th century, Chicago had risen from the ashes stronger than ever. No longer just a Midwestern trading hub, it had become a symbol of resilience and innovation. The lessons learned from the Great Chicago Fire shaped the modern city, influencing everything from firefighting and architecture to urban planning and disaster response. Today, Chicago stands as a testament to human determination, proving that even in the face of complete devastation, a city and its people can rebuild, adapt, and emerge greater than before. The Great Chicago Fire was more than just a disaster. It was a defining moment that transformed the city and reshaped the way urban centers were built across the world. In the aftermath of the destruction, Chicago did not just rebuild, it innovated, setting new standards in architecture, fire safety, and urban planning. The fire forced leaders to rethink how cities should be constructed to prevent such catastrophes in the future. Instead of remaining a cautionary tale, the tragedy became a turning point that propelled Chicago into the modern age. One of the fire's most significant legacies was its role as a catalyst for architectural innovation. The near-total destruction of downtown Chicago provided a blank slate for architects and city planners. As the city rose from the ruins, engineers began experimenting with new materials and designs that could withstand fire. The use of steel frame construction led to the birth of the skyscraper, forever changing the skyline not just of Chicago, but of cities worldwide. The Chicago School of Architecture, led by visionaries like Daniel Burnham and Louis Sullivan, revolutionized urban design, emphasizing both functionality and aesthetic appeal. The disaster also spurred major advancements in firefighting and emergency response. Chicago completely overhauled its fire department, introducing better training programs, more advanced equipment, and a more efficient alarm system. The fire's rapid spread had exposed the flaws of wooden infrastructure, leading to stricter building codes that required fire-resistant materials and better city planning. These changes influenced cities across America and beyond, prompting a wave of reforms that made urban environments safer. Despite these positive outcomes, the Great Chicago Fire has long been shrouded in myth, most notably, the story of Mrs. O'Leary's cow. According to legend, the fire started when Catherine O'Leary's cow kicked over a lantern while being milked in her barn. The tale was widely circulated in newspapers, turning Mrs. O'Leary into a scapegoat for one of the greatest disasters in American history. In reality, there was never any proof that the fire started this way. In fact, years later, the reporter who first published the story admitted he had fabricated it. Catherine O'Leary, an Irish immigrant, faced immense public ridicule and spent the rest of her life under the weight of false blame. She was harassed by reporters and treated unfairly by a city desperate to explain its misfortune. It wasn't until more than a century later in 1997 that the Chicago City Council officially exonerated her, acknowledging that she had been unfairly vilified. Today, the Great Chicago Fire remains an essential part of the city's identity. Every year, Chicago remembers the event through exhibits, historical tours, and educational programs. The Chicago Fire Department honors those who fought the flames, and the fire's anniversary serves as a reminder of the city's resilience. The disaster is even reflected in the city's sports culture. The Chicago Fire Soccer Club, for example, was named in tribute to this pivotal moment in history. More than 150 years later, the fire's legacy endures, not as a symbol of destruction, but of rebirth. Chicago emerged from the ashes not just rebuilt, but reimagined, a city that learned from its past, adapted, and became stronger. The fire may have started as a tragedy, but its aftermath proved that even the greatest disasters can ignite a new era of progress and innovation. The Great Chicago Fire of 1871 was a moment of devastation that ultimately shaped the future of the city and urban development worldwide. From its rapid spread to the immense destruction it caused, the fire exposed the vulnerabilities of a booming metropolis built largely of wood and without proper fire safety measures. But out of the ashes, Chicago didn't just rebuild. It revolutionized architecture, firefighting, and city planning, setting the stage for the modern skyline we see today. The fire's legacy is a testament to human resilience and innovation. It led to the birth of the skyscraper, stricter building regulations, and improved emergency response systems that have since influenced cities across the globe. What started as a disaster became a catalyst for progress, proving that even the worst tragedies can lead to growth and transformation. Now, I want to hear from you. What do you think was the biggest lesson from the Great Chicago Fire? Was it the importance of fire safety, the need for better urban planning, or something else? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a video. And if you want to see more content like this, drop a comment with other historical disasters you'd like me to cover next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.